So picture this. You're lying in bed. It's maybe 11:30 at night.
Right, way past when you should be asleep.
Exactly. You know your alarm is set for 6 in the morning, but you're just endlessly scrolling on your phone. And like in the back of your mind, you're stressing out about some email you haven't sent or maybe a conversation you've been actively avoiding.
Yeah, you're basically just self-sabotaging your tomorrow.
Totally. You are physically exhausted, mentally completely drained, but you just cannot put the phone down and close your eyes.
Yeah.
And for decades, I mean, psychology and self-help gurus, they've called this a lack of discipline.
Right, absolutely. They call it a character flaw or, poor time management, procrastination.
Right. But today, in this deep dive, we are going to prove to you that it is none of those things. It's actually a 4 billion-year-old survival mechanism, and it is working exactly as intended.
Yeah, I mean, it is the absolute furthest thing from a character flaw. When you really look closely at why we do the things we do, like why we self-sabotage or why we feel this sudden spike of panic on a perfectly safe Sunday afternoon.
The Sunday scaries.
Exactly. Or why we just freeze up in a meeting when we know exactly what we want to say. You're looking at biological software that is operating completely logically. It's just, running on really outdated hardware.
And that is exactly what we are exploring today. Welcome to the deep dive. We've got an incredibly dense, just fascinating stack of source material today. We're looking at 4 groundbreaking position papers written by Dr. Alan Barnard.
Yeah, and Dr. Barnard is a world-leading decision scientist. He's an absolute pioneer in something called the theory of constraints.
Which is huge.
Right.
And what he's done across these 4 papers is, well, you'd essentially unified human behavior, emotion, and consciousness into this single cohesive theory. I mean, he literally maps the software of the mind all the way back to the very first moments of biological life.
It's a phenomenal synthesis. Because, Dr. Barnard isn't just looking at psychology in a vacuum. He's pulling from evolutionary biology, neuroscience, physics, even systems engineering to explain why you operate the way you do.
It's so comprehensive. And he provides this framework that completely removes the judgment from human behavior and just replaces it with sheer mechanics.
Right, which is so freeing, honestly.
It's so freeing. So to give you a roadmap for how we're going to navigate this massive topic today, we are going to explore 4 of Dr. Barnard's deeply interrelated innovations, and they build on each other perfectly to answer that central mystery of why we do what we do.
Yeah, the 4 main pillars of his work.
Exactly. First, we're going to look at the evolution of decision-making. So specifically, how life evolved 4 distinct mechanisms to calculate decisions while hoarding energy.
Which is key. Energy is everything.
Right. Second, we'll look at the expansion of actions. We're going to trace how biological agency went from having literally 0 options as a floating cell through all those ancient survival instincts, all the way back to higher states of conscious awareness.
It's quite the journey.
It really is. Third, we're going to completely tear down Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Like, we are debunking that famous pyramid and replacing it with a fluid, constantly balancing tightrope.
That part blew my mind when I first read it.
Right. Me too.
Mm-hmm.
And fourth, we're going to give you a very specific tool. It's called the pro-con-cloud method for designing absolute win-win innovations when your brain gets paralyzed by some chronic internal conflict.
So by the time we finish pulling these 4 concepts together, you are going to understand exactly why you feel the way you do in literally any given moment.
Yeah, and more importantly, you'll understand how to read those emotions as raw data, right? How to map out the invisible conflicts that keep you stuck, and how you can consciously tap into higher states of awareness to unlock insights that your logical brain just cannot compute.
It's going to be a ride.
So let's start right at the foundation with that first innovation, the evolution of decision-making. Because before we can even talk about why you're procrastinating on your phone at midnight, we have to talk about how a decision is actually made.
Read the absolute basics.
Yeah. And in the personal development world, there's this very famous formula popularized by Jack Canfield. It's E plus R equals O. So event plus response equals outcome.
Right. The basic premise being that you can't always control the event, so you have to control your response to dictate the outcome.
Exactly. It's great advice, but Dr. Barnard takes this concept and applies it to 4 billion years of planetary history. He goes huge with it.
He really elevates E plus R equals O from just, motivational advice to the fundamental mathematical formula of biological existence.
Because the E the event is out of our hands.
Almost always. I mean, an asteroid hits the planet, a predator attacks, the temperature of the ocean drops,
Yeah.
or, in modern terms, the stock market crashes, or your boss sends you a highly passive-aggressive email on a Friday afternoon.
Oh, the worst.
Right. But the event just happens. The magic of evolution, the entirety of life's struggle to survive and thrive, is completely contained within that R. How do you calculate that response?
Yeah, and doing that biological calculation is wildly expensive.
Right. Astoundingly expensive. Over billions of years, biology layered 4 distinct mechanisms to calculate that R. And it didn't do this just to make us smarter. It did it to preserve 3 incredibly scarce biological resources:
Which are?
energy, attention, and trust.
Okay, so let's break down those 4 layers, those 4 mechanisms of R. We go back to the very beginning. Level 1 is reflex, just pure instinct. This is the oldest software we have.
Yeah, for the first 3 billion years of life on Earth, nothing felt anything. A single-cell organism encounters a chemical gradient in the primordial soup, and it just moves toward it. A plant turns its leaves toward the sun. There's no thought process.
No deliberation at all.
None, even in humans today. If you accidentally put your hand on a hot stove, your arm violently pulls back before the sensation of pain has even traveled up your spinal cord to reach your conscious brain.
Wow, so the decision is made before you even feel the heat.
Exactly. That is a reflex. It requires absolutely zero thought.
It's essentially just a hardwired rule of code. Like, if X happens in the environment, instantly execute Y.
Yeah, it's a closed circuit. And because it skips the brain entirely, it's incredibly fast. The decision of what to do when you touch a hot stove was basically made millions of years ago by your ancestors.
Because the ones who didn't pull away quickly didn't survive.
Precisely. You are just inheriting their successful biological code. But there is a massive catch here. Reflexes only work when the world is completely 100% predictable. A reflex is basically a biological bet that the future is going to perfectly resemble the past.
Which works great for basic physics, right? Fire's always hot.
Yeah.
Gravity always pulls down. But then the environment changes. We hit the Cambrian explosion roughly, 540 million years ago?
Rare take, yeah.
And suddenly, the ocean isn't just a soup of chemicals anymore. It's swarming with life. Predators, prey, things with eyes and jaws and fins and armor. The world is no longer just a predictable physics equation. It's totally chaotic.
And that presents a massive engineering problem for biology. I mean, if you're designing an organism for a totally unpredictable world, how do you program it? You can't possibly write a hardwired reflex for every possible new situation it might encounter.
Right, the universe is simply too complex.
Exactly. If an organism relies purely on a pre-programmed reflex in a genuinely novel situation, it's probably going to die. As Dr. Eli Goldratt famously said, and he was talking about business systems, but it applies here, taking a rigid, predetermined action in a complex, unpredictable environment makes you precisely wrong.
Precisely wrong. I love that phrase. You have a fast, confident, exact answer to completely the wrong question.
Right. So Mother Nature realizes she can't write an infinite number of if X then Y rules. She has to invent level 2, the second R, react.
React. Intuition. And this fundamentally is the birth of emotion, isn't it?
Yes. Instead of writing a million specific rules for a million specific events, biology built an approximate compass. It compressed all that staggering complexity of the physical world into a single, rough biological dimension.
Which is just, is this thing good for me or is this thing bad for me?
Exactly. Pleasure and unpleasure. Comfort and distress. That is the react level. It's your deep emotional circuitry.
I really want to stay on that point for a second because that completely reframes how we think about feelings. Like, emotions are not these ethereal, poetic things. They are literally a data compression algorithm.
That's a great way to put it. It's feeling your way through a problem you have never seen before.
Right. Instead of a rule that says, if you see a shadow moving at 3 miles per hour with jagged edges, move exactly 2 feet to the left, the brain just looks at the shadow and generates a feeling of dread. Shadow equals bad feeling equals get out of here right now.
Precisely. To use Goldratt's terminology again, with the react level, nature decided it's far better to be approximately right than precisely wrong. Yeah, emotions aren't meant to be highly precise, logical, nuanced readouts. They're low-resolution biological alarms. They are homeostatic error signals. They just exist to tell you that something in your environment has drifted out of your survivable range, and you need to take action to correct it.
But if emotions are just low-resolution alarms, that presents a massive survival problem for early humans,
Yeah.
right? Once we start living in complex social tribes, I mean, an alarm tells you there's a fire, but it doesn't tell you how to put it out.
Right, it doesn't give you the nuanced solution.
Exactly. Like feeling a spike of anger when someone takes your food is a great approximate compass, but if you just instantly react and punch the biggest guy in the tribe, you get kicked out and you die.
Oh.
So to solve complex social delayed consequence problems, the brain had to invent a completely new trick.
And an incredibly powerful one. Level 3, response, cognition.
So how does cognition work mechanically compared to react?
This is the deliberate, conscious pause. At this level, we don't just reflexively jerk our hand back, and we don't just emotionally react by screaming. We stop. We use working memory to hold multiple options in our head simultaneously.
We weigh pros and cons.
Exactly. We run simulations of the future. We imagine realities that haven't even happened yet just to see how our actions might play out.
This is the superpower. I mean, this is why we have skyscrapers and space stations and, podcasting equipment. We can cognitively calculate an optimized response.
It's what makes us human, really.
Right. But, okay, let's unpack this. Here is the massive question, the paradox that drives everyone crazy. If level 3 response is so vastly superior, if it allows us to plan and build and avoid terrible mistakes, why do smart people still just react emotionally in high-stakes moments?
Oh, the million-dollar question.
Seriously.
Yeah.
Like, why do I still snap at my partner when I'm tired, even though I logically know it's a terrible idea? Why are we doom scrolling at midnight?
Because that deliberate pause, the level 3 cognition, is metabolically exorbitant.
Exorbitant. It just costs too much energy.
Exactly. It runs on the prefrontal cortex, which is the slow, effortful, energy-hungry part of your brain. It requires immense amounts of working memory, self-restraint, and glucose. It burns through your daily budget of biological energy and focused attention at a massive rate.
So reverting to an emotional outburst isn't a character flaw. It is literally an energy budget crisis.
Entirely. Your brain is an exquisitely economical organ. It follows a strict, non-negotiable policy. Whatever can be automated will be automated to save energy.
That makes so much sense.
Right. So when you are decision fatigued, like at the end of a long, stressful day of making choices, or when you're deeply overwhelmed by a crisis, your brain looks at its remaining energy budget and flat out refuses to pay the exorbitant cost of level 3 cognition.
It physically cannot afford to run the simulation.
Nope. So what does it do? It defaults to the cheapest R available. It drops down to level 2, the emotional reaction, or in really severe cases, it drops all the way down to level 1, reflex.
That explains so much. That is why your absolute worst decisions cluster at 11 o'clock at night. Your brain literally cannot afford the pause, so it just reacts to whatever is immediately pleasurable or familiar, like scrolling through a feed.
Exactly. But this is where Dr. Barnard's framework takes a radical, fascinating turn. He doesn't stop at level 3.
Right, there's a level 4.
Yes, he introduces level 4. And this is where the science really starts to brush up against the profound. Level 4 is resonance, consciousness.
Okay, take me into the mechanics of that, because usually when we talk about consciousness, it gets very philosophical very fast. How does resonance fit into a biological mechanism for making a decision?
Well, resonance is the ultimate escape hatch. It's what happens when level 3 cognition entirely fails or when it's completely overwhelmed by a conflict that is so complex, so painful, or so contradictory that it simply cannot be solved by thinking harder.
Like when you're trapped in a paradox.
Exactly. When the cognitive computer crashes because the paradox is too great, it has this built-in mechanism to connect with a higher, shared state of consciousness.
And Dr. Barnard tells this incredible personal story in the papers to illustrate this, an actual near-death experience he had.
Yeah, it's a harrowing story.
He was in the hospital going in for emergency gallbladder surgery, and things went terribly wrong. His immune system was collapsing, his organs were failing, he was incredibly close to dying.
Right.
And while he was on the operating table under anesthesia with his physical body basically shutting down, his brain couldn't use reflex, you couldn't react, and it certainly didn't have the energy to use cognition to think its way out.
No, the system was crashing.
So he entered a resonance state. He describes feeling himself literally floating above his own body. He could look down, he could hear the surgeons talking, he could see the panic in the room, but he felt this profound, unbounded, absolute calm.
He wasn't fighting, he wasn't fleeing, he wasn't overthinking, he just ascended out of the localized self.
It's wild. But what's so vital to understand here is that the state he describes, that floating, that total ego dissolution, the feeling of profound peace, despite imminent physical destruction. It's not just a hallucination. It's a universal phenomenon reported across all of human history. Right?
Oh, absolutely. It is achieved through deep meditation practices, through intense breath work, through extreme states of awe, like astronauts seeing the Earth from space. They call it the overview effect.
Yes.
And increasingly, we are actually mapping it clinically. Look at the modern studies at Johns Hopkins using psilocybin and other psychedelics to treat end-of-life anxiety in terminal cancer patients. They report the exact same phenomenon.
Right. The patients report feeling connected to a massive universal whole.
Yeah.
And their fear of death just evaporates.
Because when the cognitive mind is pushed beyond its absolute limits, when the self is cornered with no physical options, the system doesn't just crash into nothingness. It transcends the individual ego. It resonates with the larger system.
It zooms out so far that the individual's pain becomes irrelevant in the face of the whole. That is just incredible. And Dr. Barnard makes a massive falsifiable prediction here.
He does.
He predicts that humanity is on the verge of learning how to deliberately enter this resonant state, not just by accident, not just by almost dying on an operating table or taking heroic doses of psychedelics, but as a deliberate, teachable tool.
Yeah. He believes we will use it when we're overwhelmed by complex global crises to gain profound survival and growth insights that our logical brains just cannot formulate.
Which makes sense historically. Think about the progression. Thousands of years ago, we slowly learned to teach level 3 cognition. We built schools, we taught philosophy, we trained people how to pause, deliberate, and think before reacting emotionally.
Right. We culturally institutionalized the pause.
Exactly. So Dr. Barnard proposes that as the complexity of our modern, hyper-connected world vastly outstrips our cognitive capacity, we will be forced to deep resonance. We need a new R to handle the existential paradoxes of the 21st century.
That is just wild to think about. A formal curriculum for transcending the ego because the math problems of society are too hard.
It's like sci-fi, but it's biology.
Yeah.
Okay, so that perfectly sets up our second main innovation, the expansion of actions, or what he calls the 8 Fs. If the 4 Rs we just talked about, reflex, react, response, resonance, are the operating system calculating the math in the background, the 8 Fs are the actual applications running on the screen.
Right. It's the physical manifestation of all that hidden math. It is how life actually expanded its menu of physical actions through what he purposefully calls error and trial.
Error and trial. And that phrasing is highly deliberate, isn't it? We usually say trial and error.
We do. We try something, it fails, we learn. But that implies intent. That implies a cognitive designer trying to solve a puzzle. Evolutionary biology is blind. It has no intent.
It's backwards.
Exactly. A random genetic mutation happens first, that is the error in the code. Then the environment tests that error, that is the trial. If the organism with the error survives the trial, the trait is retained. Error, then trial.
Okay, so let's trace this menu of actions, these physical apps, from the very beginning. The simplest organisms had absolutely zero agency. What was the first F?
Float. The earliest single-celled organisms just drifted in the primordial seas. They had no appendages, no locomotion. Event plus nothing equals whatever the ocean currents decide.
Their response was simply to exist at the mercy of physics.
Right. But then a massive error and trial occurs. Movement evolves. Flagella, fins, legs. And with movement, organisms suddenly have agency. If a threat or an opportunity appears, they can physically move toward it or away from it.
Which unlocks the ancient survival Fs, right? And these operate entirely on those level 1 and level 2 operating systems, reflex and react.
Exactly. Once you can move, you develop the 5 classic survival responses. If a predator appears, your first instinct is to flee. Get away.
Flight.
Right. If you cannot flee, or if movement would give away your position, you freeze. You hope the predator's visual system is based on motion and you remain undetected.
And if you're cornered?
If you are cornered and cannot freeze, you fight. You use whatever energy you have left to destroy the threat. So those are the threat responses. On the opportunity side, if you encounter a resource, you feed. And if you encounter a viable partner, you mate.
So those 5 S, flee, freeze, fight, feed, mate, they were the total repertoire of action for hundreds of millions of years.
They are the absolute bedrock of animal behavior.
But as mammals evolved, and specifically as social mammals evolved, life got infinitely more complicated. I mean, you aren't just running from tigers anymore. You are navigating a hierarchy within your own pack. You need social and emotional upgrades.
Which brings us to the 6th F, fawn.
Yeah, fawning is a highly sophisticated stress response.
Mm-hmm.
It is appeasement. It evolved for situations where you're faced with a threat that you cannot fight because they're too strong and you cannot flee from because you depend on them for survival.
Like an abusive authority figure. Exactly. Or an incredibly dominant, aggressive alpha in a primate pack. To survive, you submit. You roll over. You people pleaser. You make yourself small, non-threatening, and endlessly compliant just to pacify the aggressor.
And this is where the traditional psychological literature usually stops, right? Fight, flight, freeze, fawn. The trauma responses.
Yes, but Dr. Barnard points out a massive glaring blind spot in behavioral biology here. He argues that scientists have spent decades almost exclusively studying animals when they are under threat. So, naturally, they only mapped out threat responses.
Which makes sense, but it's only half the picture. What happens when an animal is not in danger? What happens when a mammal has an unmet need for connection in a completely safe, non-threatening environment?
This completely shifts the paradigm. Because if there is no threat, the animal doesn't flee, it doesn't fight, and it certainly doesn't fawn. When the environment is safe, it engages the seventh F. It familiarizes to friend.
I really want to spend some time on the story he tells to illustrate this, because it is one of the most vivid, memorable parts of his research.
It's an incredible story.
So Dr. Barnard grew up on a farm in South Africa, and when he was a young boy, he was down by a river, entirely alone, fishing. And out of the brush, a wild, massive, adult male baboon approaches him.
And this is not a pet. This is a wild primate with fangs big enough to tear a child apart easily.
Right, the biological instinct, that level 2 emotional alarm screaming in his brain would be to flee, or maybe freeze.
But if he flees, he triggers the baboon's predatory chase instinct. If he fights, he dies. If he freezes, he remains at the total mercy of a wild animal.
Exactly. It's a lose-lose-lose. So the child Dr. Barnard engages level 3 cognition. He overrides the emotional alarm. He stays perfectly calm. And he decides to run tiny incremental experiments in familiarization.
Wow.
He takes a fish he just caught and slowly tosses it near the baboon. The baboon eats it. The distance closes slightly. Then he offers a banana. He keeps his voice incredibly low and steady. He doesn't stare aggressively, but he doesn't cower either.
He's managing the tension perfectly.
Yes. Over a painstaking amount of time, the baboon comes close enough to touch. And eventually, this wild baboon starts grooming the little boy's hair, picking through his scalp looking for ticks.
It is a stunning example of the mechanism in action. It proves that when the perception of threat is meticulously, systematically removed from the environment, mammals do not just ignore each other. They use trust as a currency to build connection.
Familiarizing is the active process of closing the distance at the exact speed that trust can sustain.
Right. And the ultimate result is friending. It proves we have deep evolutionary circuitry dedicated entirely to connection that has absolutely nothing to do with pacifying a predator.
It's such a beautiful shift from defense to proactive connection. And that leads us to the final 2 Fs, which are exclusively human, or at least heavily dependent on high-level human consciousness. Through the response mechanism, that expensive, deliberate cognitive pause, we unlock the 8th F flow.
Flow is level 3 cognition firing at its absolute peak performance. It's that hyper-creative, highly productive state where time just seems to melt away.
The zone.
Exactly. You aren't fighting, fleeing, or fawning. You are holding deeply opposing needs in tension, like the need for structure and the need for improvisation, and you are effortlessly inventing entirely new options. Flow is when the heavy, expensive deliberation of cognition becomes frictionless performance.
And then we reach the ultimate peak, the absolute summit of the evolutionary mountain. We go full circle. We started with float, lowercase f, as a helpless bacteria with zero agency. But the final ultimate F is floating, capital F.
The state of resonance we talked about in the hospital.
Right. If the first 4 R's are the operating system and the physical actions are the apps, this is like upgrading a computer's OS over 4 billion years. And the absolute newest, most advanced God-tier feature looks exactly like the very first line of code, but with infinite transcendent awareness.
That is exactly the metaphor. The final F, floating, is connecting to a higher power using consciousness, not continuation. It completely replaces the localized panic of the individual self with the infinite peace of the whole.
It's profound.
It is. In the very beginning, a single cell floated because it lacked the physical agency to act. At the very end of development, a fully conscious mind floats because it has developed the ultimate wisdom to rise above the compulsion to act. It sees the entire system from above. It recognizes that to struggle is to suffer, and to float is to understand.
It is literally biological poetry. It really is. But this brings up a massive structural question. If we have these 8 apps from fighting and fleeing all the way to friending and flowing, why are they launching? If our emotions are low-resolution alarms telling us to launch an app, what exactly are those alarms measuring? What trips the wire?
That is the core of it all.
Right. And that brings us to the third core innovation, challenging Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Because to understand what our alarms are measuring, we have to completely tear down one of those famous symbols in modern psychology, the pyramid.
Yeah, everyone listening to this has likely seen Maslow's pyramid in, a Psych 101 class or in some corporate human resources seminar.
Definitely.
Physiological needs are at the very bottom: food, water, shelter. Then you step up to safety. Then you step up to love and belonging. Then you step up to esteem. And finally, sitting at the tiny peak at the top is self-actualization.
And the rigid underlying logic of the pyramid is that it is a staircase. You absolutely must secure the bottom floors before you have the luxury of climbing to the top.
We all grew up with this model. It is ubiquitous.
But the wildest thing in Dr. Barnard's research is a historical bombshell. Abraham Maslow never actually drew the famous pyramid.
He didn't. It is nowhere in his original papers, not a single drawing.
Wait, really? Where did it come from?
The pyramid was created in the 1960s by a group of management consultants as a clever visual marketing gimmick. They took a highly nuanced, complex psychological theory and just hardened it into a rigid, easily digestible corporate staircase.
And in doing so, they completely corrupted Maslow's actual theory. Maslow did not believe in a fixed staircase. He believed in what he called a fluid hierarchy of priority. He looked at human behavior and observed that the pyramid logic fails constantly in the real world.
All the time.
I mean, a starving parent will give their last piece of food to their child, sacrificing physiological survival for love. People in concentration camps, stripped of all safety and food, still clung desperately to meaning and shared their bread. If the pyramid were a strict rule of physics, those actions would be utterly impossible.
Exactly. What is fascinating here is how Dr. Barnard dismantles the pyramid and replaces it with a far more accurate, dynamic model. Needs do not stack like bricks in a building. They are paired. Every single core human need has an equal and opposite counterweight. They exist on a balancing tightrope. It is a constant shifting yin-yang.
Okay, let's look at the actual pairings on this tightrope. What are the opposing weights we are constantly trying to balance?
The first major pair is certainty versus variety. You absolutely need predictability. You need to know your house is safe, your paycheck is coming, your partner is faithful. That is certainty. But if you have absolute 100% certainty in every aspect of your life, you will go out of your mind with boredom. You feel dead inside. So to balance it, you desperately need the opposing weight: variety, novelty, surprise, adventure, risk.
Makes total sense. The second pair is connection versus autonomy, or the concept of the self. We are tribal mammals. We deeply need to belong to a group, to be loved, to be included. But if we dissolve completely into the tribe, if we agree with everything they say and do everything they want, we lose our individual identity.
We feel suffocated and trapped.
Exactly. So we need the counterweight of autonomy, the ability to say, no, this is who I am apart from you.
Then there's the pairing of significance versus humility. Every human being needs to feel important, respected, and capable. But if you are constantly the most important person in the room, if you bear all the responsibility and everyone looks to you, it is an exhausting, isolating burden.
Too much pressure.
Way too much. You also deeply need the counterweight of humility, the feeling of being a tiny, insignificant part of something vast, like looking up at the Milky Way or standing at the edge of the ocean. It relieves the pressure of the ego.
And the master pair, the tension that governs almost all major life decisions. Survival versus growth. Protecting what you currently have versus risking it all to become what you could be.
And here is the crucial mechanical insight of this model. These needs operate on an inverse U-shaped curve. There is a Goldilocks zone right in the middle of the tightrope.
Not too much, not too little.
Exactly. Too little of a need is obviously bad, but having too much of a need satisfied is equally bad because it means the opposing need is starving.
So what does this mean for how we experience stress? Like, this is the Rosetta Stone for translating our emotions. If emotions are level 2 homeostatic alarms, this tightrope tells us exactly what the alarm is screaming about.
Yes, our negative emotions are not character flaws. They are not us being weak. They are just rough compasses pointing out that one side of our tightrope is leaning too far.
Precisely. If you are feeling severe, heart-palpitating anxiety, it means your need for variety or growth has completely overpowered your need for certainty and survival. You are tipping off the tightrope into chaos. The alarm is screaming, increase certainty.
And conversely, if you feel deeply existentially bored and stale, you have too much certainty, and your need for variety is starving. The alarm is screaming, take a risk.
If you feel lonely, you need connection. But if you feel resentful, bitter, and suffocated by your family or your job, you are starved for autonomy. You don't necessarily need a therapist to fix a broken brain. You just might need to carve out an hour to be completely alone.
And when you finally take that action, you feel a deep physical sigh of relief. That sigh is the biological signal that homeostasis has been restored. You are back in the Goldilocks zone.
When you truly understand this tightrope model, you fundamentally stop fighting your negative emotions. You stop judging yourself for feeling them. Instead, you read them as raw data. You ask yourself, which specific side of my tightrope is currently starving and which side is overfed?
But here is where the rubber meets the road. What happens when we lean too far, the alarm is screaming, we engage our cognitive response to fix it, and we realize we can't?
Oh, this is the worst feeling.
It is. What happens when our level 3 cognition gets paralyzed by a chronic, unsolvable conflict? For example, you want to quit your safe corporate job to travel the world or start a business. That move feeds growth and variety. But you are terrified of going broke and losing your house, which threatens survival and certainty.
If you stay, you starve growth. If you leave, you starve certainty. So what do?
You do absolutely nothing. You freeze on the tightrope. You procrastinate.
That is the precise anatomy of a dilemma. When we are stuck in life, it is never because we are lazy. It's because any choice we can think of forces us to give up a necessary condition for our well-being. We desperately want the pros of changing, but we are terrified of the cons.
And at the exact same time, we hate the cons of our current status quo, but we are clinging tightly to its pros. We're caught in a perfect biological stalemate.
And that brings us to the fourth major innovation, the pro-con cloud method and the design of win-win innovations. This is the ultimate practical tool to escape that cognitive paralysis.
Right. Dr. Barnard created this tool by combining two phenomenal historical frameworks. First, Benjamin Franklin's classic pro-con list, which Franklin used to weigh decisions by writing them on a piece of paper.
A classic.
And second, Dr. Eli Goldratt's concept of the evaporating cloud from the theory of constraints, which is a method for resolving systemic conflicts without compromise. Dr. Barnard merged them to create a visual map of the mind's dilemma. The ultimate goal is to keep the benefits of both opposing choices while entirely eliminating their limitations.
I want to walk through exactly how this works, step by step, because this is the tool you can use tonight when you are staring at your ceiling. Imagine a blank piece of paper. You're going to draw 6 boxes on it to map out your conflict.
Okay, 6 boxes.
The middle row represents the actual choices you are agonizing over. On the far left, you draw an event box. What is the trigger making you decide? From there, an arrow points to the 2 conflicting choices, solution or change versus status quo or no change.
Let's use your example to ground this. The event might be, I received an offer to join a risky startup. The top middle box is the change, quit my corporate job and join the startup. The bottom middle box is the status quo, stay at my corporate job.
Perfect. Now we build the top row. The top row captures the unique pros, the distinct upsides of each option. Why do you want to change? Well, the pro of the startup is massive potential for wealth, excitement, and autonomy.
But why do you want to stay the same? The pro of the corporate job is guaranteed salary, health insurance, and certainty.
Then you build the bottom row, which captures the unique cons, the terrifying downsides of each option. What are you afraid of losing if you change? The con of the startup is high risk of bankruptcy and crushing stress.
And what is hurting you by staying the same? The con of the corporate job is soul-crushing boredom and regret.
So now you have a 6-box map that visually diagrams exactly why your internal needs are screaming at each other. You can see your tightrope on paper.
Yeah.
But once it is mapped, how do we solve it? People throw around the term win-win all the time in business, but they usually mean a compromise.
Like, I want to paint the office blue. You want to paint it red. Let's compromise and paint it purple. Neither of us got what we wanted. We just equally shared the misery.
Exactly. How is this pro-con cloud different?
Because a true win-win innovation in the context of Dr. Barnard's work and the theory of constraints is absolutely not a compromise. A compromise assumes a zero-sum game. A true win. Win means getting all of the pros of both options without suffering the cons of either.
How is that even possible?
You achieve this not by meeting in the middle, but by clearly defining what is good enough for both of the underlying needs on your tightrope, and then designing a completely new action.
Dr. Barnard outlines 4 specific breakthrough options to design this true win. Let's test them against our startup versus corporate job scenario. The first option is called change plus plus.
Change plus plus is a brilliant engineering approach to life choices. You decide to make the leap and choose the change, but you engineer it. You add a plus to it. That first plus is a specific action designed to preserve the best parts of the status quo.
Okay.
Then you add a second plus, which is an action specifically designed to eliminate the inherent costs or risks of the change.
So applied to our scenario, you decide to quit and join the startup The Change. But to get the first plus, you negotiate to consult part-time for your old corporate boss for 10 hours a week to maintain a baseline of guaranteed income, preserving certainty.
Brilliant.
Then, to get the second plus, you demand that the startup provide a written guarantee of 6 months of severance if they fold, or you find a co-founder to share the financial burden, eliminating the risk of the change. You get the excitement of the startup and the baseline safety of the corporation. Win-win.
Exactly. You didn't compromise, you engineered a better reality. The second breakthrough option is no change plus plus games. In this scenario, you decide to stay in your current situation, but you refuse to accept the boredom. You upgrade the status quo.
So you capture the benefits of the change without actually taking the massive leap.
Right. So you stay at your safe corporate job, but you don't just sit there miserable. You march into your boss's office and pitch an entrepreneurial, high-risk internal project that you want to lead. You get the thrill, the autonomy, and the growth of a startup environment, but you are doing it with the company's money and maintaining your health insurance.
You satisfied variety without sacrificing certainty.
The third option is when, plus when not. This is about establishing a strict boundary condition. It is the realization that a conflict often doesn't need a universal black and white answer. It just needs a context.
So you say, yes, I will absolutely join this startup and take the massive risk, but only when my personal savings account hits a threshold that guarantees I can survive for 2 years without a paycheck. You satisfy the drive for growth while putting a hard mathematical safety boundary around your need for survival.
And finally, the fourth option is simply called another change. Sometimes just the act of mapping out the pros and cons in the 6 boxes and deeply understanding the emotional tightrope underneath it makes you realize that your binary choices were a complete illusion.
You were trapped in a false dichotomy.
Exactly. By seeing the whole board, you discover a completely novel third path that honors all the necessary conditions. Maybe you realize you don't actually want to join a startup or stay in corporate. You actually want to take a 6-month sabbatical to write a book.
This methodology is so incredibly powerful. It takes the swirling, invisible murkiness of human indecision and gives it a rigid logical structure. It turns emotional panic into an engineering problem.
It really does.
So I want to pull this all together. We have covered immense ground today. Let's synthesize this unified theory. How do all of these parts, the 4 R's, the 8 F's, the tightrope, the pro-con cloud, how do they interlock in a fraction of a second when you face a crisis in your life?
Let's trace the complete chain reaction of human behavior from start to finish. It all begins with your basic human needs. When your paired needs, like certainty and variety or autonomy and connection, are perfectly balanced in the Goldilocks zone of your tightrope, you maintain homeostasis. You feel at peace. You are calm.
But life is never static. The universe is constantly throwing events at you. A pandemic hits, you get fired, you fall in love, the tightrope violently tips. A biological imbalance occurs.
And that sudden imbalance immediately triggers your level 2 emotional compass to sound the alarm. You feel a sudden rush of anxiety or a flash of anger or a profound, heavy sense of boredom.
To resolve that blaring alarm and get back to homeostasis, your brain has to use Canfield's E plus R equals O framework, has to calculate a response. If you are physically exhausted, or if it's a sudden, familiar physical threat, your brain bypasses thinking entirely. It drops down to the ancient F responses. You flee from the room, you freeze in place, you fight the person attacking you.
Or if it's a terrifying social threat, you fawn and submit.
But if it is a complex modern problem, like a career crisis, a failing marriage, or a financial dilemma, and you have the metabolic energy to pause, you engage your level 3 cognitive response. You try to think your way out of the problem. You try to initiate a state of flow to invent a solution.
And if that cognition gets stuck, if you realize that any choice violates a core need, you freeze. You are paralyzed on the tightrope. You procrastinate. But now, because of Dr. Barnard's work, you have an escape hatch.
The pro-con cloud.
Yes. You map the dilemma out using the pro-con cloud. You see the tightrope clearly in 6 boxes, and you meticulously design a win-win innovation, like change plus A to satisfy both needs simultaneously. You engineer your way out of the trap.
And finally, we reach the ultimate escape hatch. What happens when the event is so catastrophic, the conflict so massive, the emotional pain so great, or the systemic complexity so overwhelmingly vast that the cognitive mind simply cannot compute a physical solution? What happens when you are on the operating table and the math says you are going to die?
That is when you transition to resonance, the eighth F, floating. You tap into higher consciousness to completely transcend the localized ego. You view the entire tightrope, your whole life, the entire interconnected web of reality from above. You receive life-saving insights and you find the profound peace of the whole.
It is a complete, elegant, mechanically sound map of the human experience. From the mindless biology of a single cell drifting in an ancient ocean, all the way to the absolute heights of spiritual and conscious transcendence, all governed by the exact same underlying mechanics of resolving imbalances.
It's truly a masterwork of synthesis.
It is truly incredible. We have journeyed from a single floating cell in the Cambrian Sea up through the messy, emotional tightrope of human needs, through the ancient instincts of fighting and fawning, through the incredible biological triumph of familiarizing to friend, all the way to structured cognitive breakthroughs with Procon Cloud, and finally, into higher states of resonance.
We covered a lot of ground today.
To you, the listener, the ultimate takeaway here is profound. The next time you feel stuck or overwhelmed or reactive, the next time you find yourself doom scrolling for the 100th time at midnight, I want you to remember that you aren't broken. You are not flawed. You are just experiencing 4 billion years of evolutionary software trying its absolute best to find its balance on a swaying tightrope while running low on energy. Read the compass, map the conflict, and you can engineer your way out.
And if I can leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over as you go about your day, we have spent the last 4 billion years evolving these intricate, beautiful tools, reflex, react, response, resonance, to navigate the chaos of reality through blind error and trial. The environment tested us and we adapted.
Right.
But as we now rapidly enter the age of artificial intelligence systems that learn entirely through engineered trial and error, we have to ask, will those machines ever experience the tension of a tightrope? Will an AI ever possess paired opposing needs like certainty and growth? And if it does develop those needs, will it ever face a conflict so complex, a paradox so deep that its only logical move is to abandon computation and learn how to float?
From the diagnostic muddy waters of human psychology to the absolute clarity of seeing the entire system from above. Thank you for joining us for this incredibly deep dive into the unifying work of Dr. Alan Barnard. Until next time, keep mapping your clouds and keep exploring. This has been The Deep Dive.